Esteemed delegates, dear colleagues, my name is Dr. Paul Monaghan and I'm a member of the UK Parliament from the Scottish National Party. Today, leaders have met again here in New York for another UNGASS on drugs. This event offers the opportunity to learn from the policies of the past and build an alternative response to drug use that is rooted in science, public health, human rights and dignity. My own country, Scotland, experienced an epidemic of HIV among drug injectors in the 1980s. This epidemic led directly to the introduction of needle exchanges and opioid replacement therapy, particularly methadone. These programmes very rapidly reduced new infection rates to a fraction of previous figures. Last year, world leaders adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, which include a target to end AIDS by 2030. To achieve this ambitious goal, we need leadership on harm reduction. Harm reduction leadership means increasing political support and funding for harm reduction. At last count, investment in harm reduction in low and middle income countries totaled $160 million, only 7% of what is required. By contrast, $100 billion is spent annually on drug enforcement and control. If the implementation of harm reduction continues at its current level, only a minimal reduction in new HIV infections will be seen. A tiny shift in funding could virtually end AIDS among people who inject drugs by 2030. By moving as little as 7.5% of current spending on drug enforcement into harm reduction programmes, we could achieve a 94% reduction in new HIV infections among people who inject drugs and reduce HIV-related deaths by similar proportions. I urge Member States and their esteemed delegates gathered here today to recognise the provision of harm reduction and evidence-based drug treatment, including in prisons and other closed settings, as a legally binding human rights obligation. I also call on Member States to recognise that the 2011 target of halving new HIV infections among people who inject drugs by 2015 has been missed, and commit to a new HIV prevention target for people who inject drugs of a 75% reduction in new HIV infections by 2020. Acknowledge the global deficit for sustainable funding of harm reduction programmes and support a shift of resources away from punitive responses towards proven harm reduction interventions. Recognise the importance of the removal of legal barriers to ensure equitable access to harm reduction services. Delegates, the world has failed people who inject drugs too many times. We cannot be serious about human rights and ending AIDS if we are not also serious about harm reduction. Thank you very much.